I have to start today's video with a disclaimer. Don't go to Dudleytown, Connecticut. This is not a prank, it's not a stunt, it's not clickbait, it's the truth. I'm confident that at the end of this video, there are going to be people that want to go. Don't do it. 1, it's illegal to go to Dudleytown, it's private property. And 2, as you'll see in today's video, there is a reason why people abandon Dudleytown. It is not a safe place for people. But before we get into the story about Dudleytown, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place, because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So if that's of interest to you, the next time the like button is playing an intense game of online FIFA, wait until they get the lead and then unplug their Wi-Fi. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's story. It was a bright summer day in 1906, and Dr. William C. Clark and his wife Harriet were driving slowly through a beautiful part of northwestern Connecticut called Litchfield County. Litchfield is a rural, very hilly area with lots of winding country roads, and the Clarks were there to try to scout out an area to build their second home. The couple lived full-time in New York City, where Dr. Clark was an oncologist, which is a cancer doctor, and he was also a professor at the Columbia College of Physicians and Surgeons. And while the Clarks' lives were very exciting and fulfilling in the city, they were also very hectic and chaotic. And so the reason they had settled on Litchfield as the place to look for a location for their second home is because it was the total opposite of the city. It was quiet, it was peaceful, it was perfect. And so as this couple from New York City drove along these winding backcountry roads, they eventually reached this beautiful covered wooded bridge. And after they drove across it, they got this view up onto this mountainside off to their right. And high up on this mountain was this huge, shaded, beautiful forest. And they saw there was a road that appeared to kind of spider off and go into these woods. Now, the couple had no idea what was up there, but it was just so beautiful, and they were immediately so drawn to it that they decided they would go check it out and see if maybe there was a spot for their second home in these woods. And so Dr. Clark took the car and he went up this access road. And very quickly, as they began climbing up this hillside, the road became very bumpy and overgrown. It was pretty obvious that not many cars were driving into these woods. And so before they even reached the tree line, Dr. Clark had to pull the car over and park it on the side of the road. And then he and Harriet got out. And then on foot, they continued up towards the forest. And once the couple actually entered the forest, immediately the sunlight faded because the canopy over their heads was so thick, and the air became cool and refreshing. And after walking for only a couple of minutes, the forest, which at first seemed very still and quiet, suddenly became alive. They could hear birds chirping and animals running around and insects buzzing. And then, up ahead, they saw there was this field off to the side of the road that was full of all these wild apple trees growing in all different directions. And as they got closer, they saw there was just a deer right in the middle of the apple trees, eating apples directly off the branches. And then, just past all these apple trees, the couple began passing these huge, beautiful patches of roses and lilacs and bright yellow bitter tansy flowers that lined the road. And then, before long, the couple was stepping over these babbling brooks, and off in the distance they could hear the sound of running water, like fresh spring water coming down off the mountain. And then, as the sun did begin to poke through the canopy above them, it almost looked like the forest was sparkling. Literally, this forest was sitting on a hillside, and the hillside, which was made up of rock, had mica inside of it. And mica is a kind of mineral that when sunlight hits it, it almost looks like it's shimmering. And of course, there were the owls. As Dr. Clark and his wife walked farther and farther into this beautiful forest, they heard more and more owls hooting off in the distance. And to the Clarks, this made the forest feel enchanted. It was like the owls were personally greeting them. By the time the couple had turned around and begun heading back to their car, they had already made up their mind that they were going to build their second home in that forest. And so, after returning to their home in New York City, they promptly put in the paperwork to purchase 1,000 acres inside of that Connecticut forest. And that forest had a name. It was called Dark Entry, and it was named that because it looked like from the outside, the forest was basically dark all the time. There was shade cast on it from mountains nearby, and then also the canopy inside of Dark Entry is exceptionally thick. At one time, there actually had been a town inside of Dark Entry Forest. However, all the people who had lived in that town were now all gone. The only remnants of this town were a couple of crumbling stone walls and a couple of home foundations that were scattered about the Dark Entry Forest floor. The Clarks had seen these ruins as they walked along this overgrown path through the forest, but they weren't concerned. Instead, they felt like these ruins actually added some charm to the forest. After the land purchase was finalized, Dr. Clark began looking for local builders in Connecticut who could help him build this second home inside of Dark Entry Forest. But no matter how much money he offered these local Connecticut builders, they all said no. None of them gave a straight answer to Dr. Clark about why they were turning him down. So Dr. Clark just kind of assumed that, hey, this project is not huge, it's just one house, and the forest is pretty isolated and hard to get to, and so he thought probably these builders think it's not worth the effort. But Dr. Clark was not discouraged. He decided he would just build the house himself. After all, he was a very handy, competent guy who had grown up on a farm in New Jersey, and so he knew how to build things. And so, for the next several months, Dr. Clark would travel from New York City to Dark Entry Forest every weekend, and he would build this home. First, he cut down this massive swath of hemlock trees on this one flat patch of his land, and then, with all this lumber he had cut down, he built this rustic two-story cabin on this flat part of his land. And then nearby, on this hilltop, there was a freshwater spring at the top, and so he laid piping from the spring into his cabin so they could have fresh water. And then at the bottom of this nearby hill was this brook, and Dr. Clark loved just standing and watching this brook because inside of it were all these trout that would dart all around. And so Dr. Clark built a swimming pool with beautiful mossy embankments right up against this brook so he could sit there and watch the fish. By Thanksgiving of that year, the cabin was done, and so Dr. Clark and his wife, Harriet, they stayed at the cabin to celebrate the holiday. And as they were sitting in their swimming pool watching the trout and listening to the owls hoot off in the distance, they both agreed that this second home was like their little piece of heaven. So every summer from there on out, and every major holiday that they could manage it, the Clarks would travel to their home in Dark Entry Forest, and they would swim and hike and relax, and they'd watch the leaves on the mountainside turn from green to bright yellows and oranges and reds. It was perfect. Until 1918. That summer, the couple was in their second home in the forest when Dr. Clark was suddenly called back to New York to attend a medical emergency. Harriet was very upset at the prospect of suddenly being left alone in this cabin in the middle of the forest by herself for who knows how many days. And so, when she dropped her husband off at the train platform, she made him promise that he would come back soon, and he said he would. And then Dr. Clark took on the train and took off into the distance. From his comfortable seat on that train, Dr. Clark had no idea that his wife was about to endure a nightmare. When the Clarks bought their 1,000 acres in Dark Entry Forest, they did virtually no research on the forest or the surrounding area. If they had, they very likely would not have purchased that land. You see, the town that used to be inside of Dark Entry Forest, that was now just ruins that the Clarks saw when they first walked around inside of the forest, was abandoned for a very specific reason. It was cursed. At least, that's what the locals say. And in fact, that was the reason why no local builders in the area were willing to go with Dr. Clark into the forest to go build his house, because they were too scared to go anywhere near the ruins of this cursed town. This town, which was known as Dudleytown, was first settled sometime in the 1740s. At first, it was just a couple of people in a couple of small structures, but pretty quickly, 30 families had moved in, and it was a thriving little town. But as the 1700s came to an end, terrible things began to happen to residents. First, there was the Carter family. They moved to Dudleytown in 1759, and shortly after arriving there, 6 members of their family all died suddenly from cholera. The remaining branch of the Carter family was so grief-stricken from their losses that they left Dudleytown and went to New York, where they resettled. But almost immediately after getting set up there, Native Americans raided their property and massacred them. And the 3 people that survived this massacre were 3 of the kids, and they were all kidnapped and taken away. In 1792, Dudley resident named Hollister died suddenly. Now, we don't know if he fell off a roof or if he was murdered. No one really knows. But what we can agree on is that his untimely death happened in the home of Tanner. And Tanner, following Hollister's death,